I upload daily NBA content on this channel, so if that is something that you are interested in, then subscribe. Also drop a like on this video. It only takes 1 second and it makes a massive difference. Also real quick, there is a new episode of the podcast that should be out today. Me and Mojo had his girlfriend on the podcast. This was shot back when we were in Atlanta like 2 months ago, so I look very different, but regardless of that, it's a fun podcast. Go watch that podcast. So today I wanted to talk about a kind of broad topic that was kind of briefly touched on in B Souls' most recent video. This was not stolen. That's just kind of how it worked out. I was planning on doing this like a week ago, but I wanted to talk about some young players, and not all the time young players, but players that get blamed for bad situations throughout their careers. B Souls took more of an approach to legacy long term. I'm just talking about right now in terms of how we talk about current day NBA players and where we rank them as a result of poor circumstances.
Absolutely incredibly with the acrobatic alley-oop.
So there's a good handful of guys who get far too much shit because of the circumstances they are in, especially young players, which I really do not understand. Like Devin Booker and Zach LaVine are at least not that young anymore, and Karl Anthony Towns is not that young anymore. Trae Young gets criticized because his team isn't winning much, which I think is just absurd. Now, I do think some people need to pump the brakes in terms of ranking him higher than other players, but I've seen people say that Ja Morant is better than Trae Young just because Ja has led his team to nearly the playoffs, which, yes, I'm taking direct shots at my editor. Do not edit me to be blue again, you motherfucker. And like, I find things like that quite ridiculous. Like, we are very much overvaluing winning early on in the careers of these young players. If you replace Trae Young with Ja Morant and that Memphis team, which had a lot of veterans and good players like Jaren Jackson Jr. for a good chunk of the season, then I am confident saying that they would have been just as successful, if not more successful. In fact, they would be more successful. I'm not even going to say if not. They definitely would. But let's talk about really the three main guys, and really one of them doesn't get as much flack for this, but I really want to put a focus in this video on Zach LaVine, Devin Booker, and Karl Anthony Towns. So Devin Booker is the guy who's kind of the exception to this rule, because I find it odd how he's just kind of the guy that always gets away with his team not being that great. And don't get me wrong, he doesn't deserve crap for what his team does and how his team performs, because very often without him, his team would have 5 wins instead of like 30. And he obviously showed incredible leadership and talent in the bubble this year when he led the Phoenix Suns on an 8-0 run. However, I don't understand why he gets this pass while guys like Karl Anthony Towns do not. When I would argue that throughout their careers, Devin Booker has had more help than Karl Anthony Towns has, and yet I consistently see people ranking Devin Booker higher than Cat, which I find quite absurd, because Cat, I believe, is a stupid star. Cat, I believe, is a superstar level player who is not quite at that level yet just because he hasn't proved it. But like, I think given the opportunity to prove it, he will prove to be a superstar level player. Devin Booker, not quite the same. And please bear in mind, as everyone always freaks out when I say this, my definition of a superstar is very strict. And a center who can shoot 9 threes a game on 40% or 40+%, many of them being step back and contested, while also being able to generate like 28 points per game on over 60% true shooting, that guy I take over Devin Booker, no question. On top of the fact that he's a very good rebounder, a very good passer for a center, and alright-ish defensively, not as big of a liability as he used to be. And I should say, that is a common denominator between all of these guys that I've mentioned, including Trae Young. Zach is a poor defender, Devin Booker is a poor defender, Karl Anthony Towns is a poor defender, and Trae Young is the worst defensive player in the league. And I think there's this common trend where I find it annoying because I can't really decide where NBA fans stand on defense, because from a lot of angles it seems like people do not properly appreciate defense. Like that DeMarcus Cousins versus Joel Embiid conversation. I find that conversation ludicrous because, while Joel Embiid is probably not quite as good as DeMarcus Cousins on offense, there's no doubt in my mind that he wins that overall conversation because of his defense. When you bring this over to guys like those guys I mentioned, Zach, Booker, Cat, and Trae, I feel like people overvalue defense and are not properly appreciating how impactful their offense is. While obviously bad defense is no bueno, it's certainly not the end of the world. And if you can average an efficient 25 plus points per game, then you're a valuable NBA player. I don't care if you're the worst defensive player in the league. Think about the Atlanta Hawks. Are you telling me the Atlanta Hawks, if Trae Young was not on that team and it was just replaced by an okay defensive player at point guard and then an okay offensive player at point guard to kind of even it out, are you telling me that they're going to be a better team just because of that difference in defense? No, because offensively, Trae Young carries that team so significantly that it's the only reason they don't have 0 wins. That's the same argument I have made for Zach LaVine for pretty much his entire time in Chicago. Well, yeah, Zach LaVine should not be leading your franchise and he should not be the primary reason for your team having any success at all. That is the case with Zach in Chicago for the past couple of years. I've seen so many people make the argument, well, Zach LaVine is not leading your team to 40 wins, and I would say that's not Zach LaVine's fault, it's the Chicago Bulls' fault. And that's kind of the crux of everything here. The circumstances are not good enough around these players to where a lot of them are forced to do too much, and that leads to them averaging a lot of points, and people accuse that of being empty stats, but really it's just an empty fucking team. So somebody has to shoot the ball, and you give it to your best player. That's the whole empty stats argument, which I've already gone into before. But in the cases of a lot of these young players, I feel like so many people make that empty stats argument, and all these players I've mentioned, I'm not going to keep saying their fucking names. All of these players that I've mentioned, their teams would be far worse off without them. And I'm not just talking about in the long term, I'm talking about right now. Trae Young, removed from the Atlanta Hawks, I don't even remember what their record was. I think they had 20-something wins. They would have, I'm not even kidding, they'd have like 5 or 6. That's how bad the Atlanta Hawks core around Trae Young actually is. And they have potential in the long term, but as of right now, that's what's happening. Zach LaVine and the Chicago Bulls, while that core is not as horrible, with last year's coaching fiasco with the worst coach in maybe league history, a lot of injuries on top of that, of course, the Chicago Bulls were not going to win 45 games under those circumstances. I didn't expect Jim Boylen to be the worst coach that I have ever seen in any sport on any level ever. That's a factor there. And then with Devin Booker, the help around him has never been either consistent or just not good enough. This year was the opportunity for it to be really consistent and good enough, but then DeAndre Ayton was suspended for 25 games, and it led to Aaron Baines having a pretty damn good season and the best of his career by far. However, it shouldn't be relied upon Aaron Baines to fill the void that DeAndre Ayton left behind. Even in the case of the Atlanta Hawks, John Collins missed 25 games from suspension as well, so that doesn't help either. So my main point is, these teams are just bad, and these players are not bad, and I feel like very often players like a Ja Morant get ranked over players like a Trae Young just because of circumstances that are outside of either player's control. And this is not an attack on Ja Morant by any means. The guy is a phenomenal player, but he's not better than Trae Young. And the fact that winning is being factored this significantly this early into both of these players' careers, I think is absurd, especially considering the difference in circumstances. So the main point that I am trying to make here is stop valuing these players so significantly by winning when that factor is out of their control. Let's talk about Bradley Beal. Bradley Beal is very clearly a very talented NBA player, but in Washington, the team is not good at defense in the slightest. There is a okay defensive player on that team in Thomas Bryant and then also Ish Smith. Those are the only 2 decent defensive players on the entire roster. And because of that, they suck at defense. They were 30th in defense this year. And offensively, they were great because of guys like Beal, Davis Bertans, and Thomas Bryant, and Rui Hachimura. But the overall team was bad. And Bradley Beal does not get flack from this because in the past he was a part of a winning team as a second option, so no one really blames Beal for this. However, if you cut out that context previous to Beal doing that, I guarantee you people would be saying that his 30 points per game were empty and that he wasn't actually that good because look at how successful his team is. It's the same dumb argument if you remove that context, and by every means that context is important. But what I'm trying to say here is that it's not fair to evaluate these talents based on their circumstances. Just like it's unfair to evaluate Beal based on this year alone, it would be unfair to base your entire opinion around Karl Anthony Towns based on the incompetence of the Minnesota Timberwolves for the past couple of years. If you can see that with Bradley Beal, I don't know why you can't see that with the Timberwolves, with the Suns, with all of those other guys. So stop blaming young players for bad circumstances. Empty stats is generally a dumb concept, and even if a player is putting up more stats than they should be on a bad team, it's not their fault, And most people, I don't think, are hyping up Trae Young just because he averages 28 and 9. If he averaged 23 and 7, he would still be as good as I think he is. And while I am using Zach LaVine a lot as an example in this video, because I'm obviously a Chicago Bulls and Zach LaVine fan, both Trae Young and Karl Anthony Towns are also up there in my favorite players in the league. So it's not just a Zach LaVine thing. But my point is, you guys get undue criticism, but I think I've made that very clear by now. If you want to support this content outside of just your like and subscription, I have a Patreon where you can get some extra content. Shout out to Rudy for editing this video. That is the end of this video. Please be sure to like and subscribe for more NBA content like this, and cue the outro music. You're allowed to edit me to be blue for comedic effect. That's what I was setting up there.